Bonjour. I would like to start by apologizing for my inability to speak French. It's my great shame. I wish I could present to you in French. It's one of my failings that my bilingual children bug me about every day. So they were embarrassed for me on your behalf. It is a great honor to be here. This is my first time to this university. It's my first time to this part of Quebec. It's a wonderful opportunity for me to have to present my Trudeau lecture, but also to interact with some of the faculty here at this university. I'm going to speak today about something I feel very passionate about, and I was told by the Trudeau Foundation that I should take this opportunity to do just that. And I'm going to talk about the many ways in which health science is spun, the many ways that it is twisted by social forces, by the media, and by the market. I hope that you find this talk interesting and maybe a little bit fun and a little bit useful, but I'm also very interested in your own thoughts on what I feel is an incredibly important topic, and that is how we can get to the truth of what makes us healthy. So what I'm going to talk about today, now does everyone recognize this individual as Gwyneth Paltrow? Does anyone not recognize Gwyneth? Well, as everyone knows, Gwyneth Paltrow is one of the most famous actors in the world, and she also assumes that she is a health expert. And for my latest book that comes out in the near future, I actually followed Gwyneth very closely and all the advice that she provides. And she is a wonderful example of how advice about health, how information about health is literally everywhere. So I've structured my talk a little bit around a few questions from Gwyneth. What is the impact of the confused and conflicted health messages that are out there? And as I'll see, I'll go through some of the evidence. There is a lot of evidence to support the fact that, yes, the health messages are tremendously confused, and this is having a tangible impact on the health of our population. What are the forces that twist health science? And is it really Gwyneth's fault? Yes, it is a little bit Gwyneth's fault. I will turn to the impact of celebrities on this story. But as we'll see, there's lots of evidence about how health science and how health information in general gets twisted. And then I am going to conclude with some recommendations. I'll pepper them throughout my talk about what we really can do to be healthy, and I'm sure everyone in this room has thoughts on this also, but I think it's true that we can almost ignore all of the information that is out there in popular culture about health. Now, I have a warning before I proceed that I am going to ramble, and by that I mean there's so much information out there that is relevant to this topic that I've taken this opportunity as a Trudeau scholar to really talk about some of the things that I'm fascinated in. So I'm gonna pick and choose, do some cherry picking on some of the things that I'm fascinated in. I'm also going to speculate. Some of the things that I'm going to talk about, some of the conclusions are, I admit, speculation. But I think, again, this is a wonderful opportunity to do just that and to reflect on the evidence that I've looked at over my 20-year career. And then I'm going to conclude with some obvious statements. But I think that's okay, too, because I think these are incredibly important conclusions. One more caveat before I proceed. I always think it's important for scholars to say what their biases are, to say what their conflicts are. And my bias is I always assume whenever I hear anything about health in the popular press, whenever I see anything about health in the news, I assume that nothing works. And history tells us that is almost always the case, particularly when you're talking about diet and fitness, which is tremendously important to the fighting of chronic disease. But I think you can almost always assume that nothing works. And I think this is an important point of view to take because I do think that kind of skepticism is healthy. For me, I need a lot of good evidence now to convince me that almost anything works. Okay, so moving forward, what is the impact of the confused and conflicted health messages out there? Well, right now, we are doing some research on vitamin D and the messages that we hear around vitamin D. How many people in the audience take vitamin D supplements, vitamins? Be honest. A lot of people. Well, this is a wonderful example of an area where the message is incredibly confused in both the popular press and in the academic literature. So in 2010, and again, this is a study that we've just finished and is actually submitted for peer review. In 2010, if you looked at the headlines all over the world, you get messages like this. What do you lack? Vitamin D. Can vitamin D replace the flu shot? Maybe. The answer is no, by the way. Can vitamin D, we should take triple the recommended amounts. Everyone's seen these messages, right? Move forward just 3 years, same newspapers, different messages, right? Vitamin D, limited value. Don't waste your money on vitamin D, right? Vitamin D, not as effective as we used to think. And we've mapped hundreds of these articles from all over the world. And in fact, as people in this room probably know, the literature is very conflicted on this, whether we need vitamin D or not. So a great example of a conflicted message that the public needs to deal with. There are many more of them. Superfoods, right? Ice cream and bacon as a superfood. I wish bacon was a superfood. Unfortunately, it is not. Shortly later, we find out that bacon is actually quite bad for you, in a very particular and odd kind of way. There are no superfoods, right? Here's another one of my very favorite examples. Red wine is good for you, right? How many people have heard that message over and over again? Is it true? Well, the data is actually more uncertain than often portrayed. Recent studies say it's not good for you after all, and other recent research has even questioned the value of antioxidants more broadly. Right? So another great example of a conflicted message. Studies have shown again and again, and this is a terrific study from the UK. Ben Goldacre is one of the authors, one of my favorites. He, again, noting that the messages around dietary and health advice is incredibly conflicted. And then, of course, no surprise here, everything you hear from Wikipedia is wrong. Well, 9 out of 10 things. So we have this evidence that there's a conflicted message, and as you guys know, I could go on and on and on. Given that, it's no surprise that the public is very, very confused. And again, we have research to support us here. This was a terrific study from the United States, and a very similar one was done in Canada by my colleague Arya Sharma, came to the same conclusion. Look at this. They asked, Americans think that doing their taxes is easier than figuring out what to eat, how to exercise, and how to be healthy. Ridiculous, right? And this kind of confused message has an impact on the decisions that people make. This was an interesting study, a relatively small one, that found that, these confused messages cause the public to shut down. Now, I know there are healthcare providers in the room, and you've probably maybe experienced this, right? That people just don't know what to do, so they sort of freeze. They ignore the information. Another study talks about healthy eating, the overload that the impact has, the confused messaging also causes the people just to start ignoring things altogether. In addition to that, and here I am speculating, and I promised I would do a little bit of that, I think this confused messaging also has an impact more broadly on people's understanding of health messages. If you do polls and research on this, often people's understanding of what it takes to be healthy is incredibly low. Look at this study. 73% of Canadians were not aware of the link between cancer and a lack of exercise. 2/3 are not aware of the link between that and being overweight. The data from all over the world confirms this kind of lack of understanding, which I think flows in part from the confused messaging. The other thing that comes from this confused messaging and the twisting of science, it allows health myths, health untruths to live on. And this is one of my very favorite examples of it. I took these pictures just a couple weeks ago in an airport. I stood in front of the magazine rack, took out my phone, and took pictures of all the covers of the women's health magazines. Every statement here is not true, right? You cannot spot reduce, right? Did you guys know that? I mean, you guys know that because you're smart. You cannot do it. That is a myth, a physiological lie. But you think of the magnitude of the fitness industry that is based on that lie, that somehow you can twist your tummy and you'll lose the fat there. Or this is another great example, that you can do arm exercises and get Michelle Obama's arms or Jennifer Aniston's arms. That's not true. And of course, this is something that we've wanted to do forever, right? This is a lie that has lived on forever, right? Here's a great example of a rubber outfit that you could wear that allows you to lose weight and the spots that you want to lose them. But they're all lies, you guys. It's just not true. Now, this seems like an interesting and a frivolous point to make, a kind of fun debunking, but I think it has real health implications, right? Because it distracts us from the activities that we should be doing to be healthy. In addition to that, it emphasizes the idea of aesthetics, right? Of doing exercise for the particular goal of looks, as opposed to doing exercise for lifestyle and health. And studies tell us again and again that this is why people work out, this is why people diet, not for health. They do it primarily for aesthetics. Now, this is a small study, but I love it because it's a wonderful example of the degree to which this is true. This was a study, and the cohort, I believe, was 61 to 94 women. And even for that age group, the primary reason that people that diet and exercise is for looks, right? And I think this kind of messaging that we get from the media, these kind of myths, allow that kind of ethos to live on. Okay, so the other problem I think what happens that comes from this confused messaging is the older people, not that you're older, sir, are laughing because they remember this conspiracy. The other thing that lives on as a result of this confused messaging, I think, are conspiracy theories associated with health, right? So this is a great old conspiracy theory, the idea that Elvis still lives. Apparently, he's still alive. But there are also dangerous health conspiracy theories that live on. This was a study that was done in the United States. It came out very recently. I think it's a terrific study. It's one of those studies I see and I thought, I wish I thought of that. I wish I did that study. But it is depressing. It's a very depressing study, and I think the data would be very similar in Canada. Basically, what they did is they asked a group of Americans whether they believed in a particular absurd, scientifically untrue health conspiracy theories. And the first one, fear not, I won't go through all of these, but I'll highlight a couple. The first one is the idea that the FDA, the Food and Drug Administration, is deliberately holding back natural cures for cancer in the service of pharmacy, right? Look at the number of people that believe that story. 37%, right? And almost just as depressing, 31% go, maybe that's true. That sounds like it could be true. Really sad. I'll just highlight this next one, the vaccine myth, which drives me nuts. And this is the idea that the government and healthcare providers know that vaccine causes autism. By the way, it does not. And despite that knowledge, they continue to give it to children. Look at the number of people that believe that dangerous health lie and the number that think it might be true. And even if you look at just this last column, and this is the last column is the people that disagree with these statements, the numbers are all depressingly low, right? The number of people that believe these conspiracies. And I think these conspiracies can thrive because of the confused and conflicted messages that permeate popular culture around health. So the next sort of byproduct of this phenomenon is what I call the legitimization of pseudoscientific ideas. And this is things like the concept of vitalism. I'm not sure if that has a good French translation, and if not, I apologize. The idea that there are energy fields, that somehow there are these magical energy fields that permeate our body. It has no foundation in science. or the idea that nature cures, this nature cure ideology. I think that these kinds of ideas can thrive because there are so many different conflicting scientific theories that appear to be legitimate in the popular culture. And these can, again, have a real impact on individuals' health. It can lead to the unnecessary taking of supplements. It can lead to crazy health actions like colon cleanses. It can lead to things like people believing that coffee enemas have a real benefit. And of course, it can lead to things like the anti-vaccination movement. Again, very, very dangerous. So we have this clearly twisted messaging out there, these conflicting messages out there, and then we have what I think could be real impacts. Now, before I proceed, I want to note that I appreciate that this is a very complicated phenomenon, both psychologically, socially, and I'm not suggesting that just having clear scientific information available will cause people to behave in a rational manner or to only behave in a science-based manner. People make health decisions based on a whole bunch of reasons, right? It's not just based on evidence. And I'll just use one study as an example to make my point. This was a study that looked at why people take supplements. And as people in this room probably know, there's very little evidence to support the idea of taking a whole bunch of supplements. In fact, I would argue there's very little evidence for most supplements in general. But people take supplements for a whole bunch of reasons. And yes, they do take them for health reasons. They take them because they think it's going to boost their immune system. Everyone wants to boost their immune system, apparently. It's going to prolong their life. They feel like it's a good substitute for other kind of pharmaceuticals. It's going to enhance how they look. So there are these sort of physiological reasons, these health reasons why people take supplements. But people also take supplements for other reasons. They take it because it fits with their ideology. They're concerned about the commodification of health, and somehow they think that supplements push back against that. They believe in a natural approach to health, and somehow they think that supplements fits with that ideology. It fits with their overall identity package. So the reason people do take health actions are complicated, and I'm not suggesting that just having good health information will solve that. And in fact, I shouldn't say it's even a problem that needs to be solved. You can make the same complex factors play a role in virtually every single health decision, right? Going gluten-free or anything like that, right? So it's not just about the evidence. But having said that, I still think having good evidence available is very, very important. In addition to that, we also have to recognize that just having good health information available will not necessarily mean that people will make the right choices. This is a fascinating study that got a lot of press. I don't know if you guys saw this one. This was a study where they summarized the methodology. They tried to convince anti-vaccination parents using good scientific information about the real risks and harms and benefits of vaccination to vaccinate their kids. Did the provision of this scientifically accurate information have an impact? No. And in fact, it made the women, the parents, more wedded to their belief in anti-vaccination. So just giving people accurate information will not necessarily change their behavior. In addition to that, we all bring to the table a whole bunch of different cognitive biases. And I'm not going to go through all of them, but I'll just use one example, and this is what's been called the causal illusion. Right? So even if we want to use evidence to inform our health policies, we have cognitive biases that may make that difficult. This is a study that was trying to figure out why people believe in pseudoscientific medicines. Why do they think they work? And these people did a study sort of to demonstrate or to argue, to support the idea that it's a causal illusion. They think that taking a homeopathic solution had a certain impact when in fact the connection between the two is an illusion. So even when people want to use good health information or be evidence-based, it can be very, very difficult. Finally, before I move on to the next point, I'd like to highlight, now I often hear that people say, well, this problem of following pseudoscientific information or being confused can be solved through education, right? If we had a very educated populace, then we wouldn't have to worry about this, pseudoscientific and confused messaging. But in fact, that's not the case. This is another study that just came out, and this preliminary, that found that better educated people were more likely to follow dubious health information on the web than people with just a high school education. Isn't that fascinating? Now, the authors here just speculate it's because people with high school educations are more likely to defer to experts, whereas people with a university education are more likely to trust their own view and their own ability to find health information on the web. So the bottom line is, this is very, very complicated. But despite all those caveats, I still think that creating an environment where there is accurate and unbiased and trustworthy health information available is absolutely essential. And more importantly, I think, all of this, as I alluded to again and again, all of this messaging, all of these conflicting stories confuse and distract and divert and cloud the truth about health. And in fact, I think, I'm greatly simplifying on purpose, there are really 5, maybe 6 or 7 things that human beings can do. And I'm not talking about socioeconomic strata, I'm not talking about who your parents are, I'm talking about the kind of actions that you can do yourself. There are really 5 or 6 or 7 things that humans can do to be healthy. It's that simple. And everything else, almost everything else that we're fed about health is somewhat of a distraction. Now, what are those 5 things? They're incredibly obvious. They don't smoke, right? If you smoke, virtually everything else you do is irrelevant. I have colleagues that smoke and they worry about GMO food, which seems insane to me. Or they smoke and they drink bottled water because they're worried about contaminants. Or they smoke and they eat organic food. If you smoke, nothing else matters. If you believe the World Health Organization, smoking will kill 50% of the people that do it. Okay, and in Canada, things are getting better. We're down to 17% smoking rate, but we could do even better. And it shouldn't be forgotten that more people on planet Earth smoke now than ever before. So this remains a huge issue. The second thing, vigorous exercise, right? Real exercise. I love this quote. Exercise easily surpasses the effectiveness of any drug or other medical treatment. It truly is a magical force, exercise. Just exercise. Nothing special. Do it, right? The next one, I'm cheating a little bit. It's eat real food. But even here we can be simple, and we could ignore so much of what we hear. You eat lots of fruits and vegetables, whole grains, lean protein, some dairy, a little bit of alcohol. There's nothing magical, right? It's that simple, and studies, again, have shown this over and over again. Fourth is a tough one, maybe the hardest, weight management. We should strive to do that. And finally, take some preventative actions. Wear a bicycle helmet. Wear your seatbelt. There's a great picture of a celebrity riding his bike from Whole Foods with his bag of organic apples with no helmet. And the risk perception is fascinating. You just take these if you're not taking basic health prevention steps, all these other things on the margin seem foolish. Now, there are some emerging things that we should also be doing, such as perhaps sleeping more. I think that this is emerging as one of the great public health concerns. And there's also an issue that everyone sits too much, right? That we should be standing more often. And I think this data is starting to emerge to be legitimate. So I might add in the future, if I had the opportunity to give a talk like this again, I might add sleeping and standing to my list of things to do, and particularly sleeping. I think it's very, very important. So why raise these concerns that are so obvious? Well, because absolutely no one's doing them. If you believe the studies, very few Canadians, very few Americans, very few people in the UK are getting enough exercise or eating enough fruits and vegetables. These basic truths are lost, and I think one of the reasons they're lost is because the health messages are so confusing for the general public. I'll just highlight one of these studies. This was a study from the United States that found only 5% of Americans, and I think that's generous, are getting any form of vigorous exercise. What do you think the number one moderate exercise is in the United States? I want to guess. The number one moderate exercise. Walking's a good guess. No, it's food preparation. So that's the situation we're at, you guys. That's where we are. This was an interesting study done by the American Medical Association. They had a list of 7 activities. It was similar to my list of 5. They had 7. I think they had sleeping in there also. And they found that only 1 in 1,000 Americans are doing these activities. Okay, so it is a very problematic situation that we have. Okay, so we have a confused message that's out there, and I think this confused message is having real health implications. So what's causing this confused health message? Now here I'm going to a little bit diverge because I'm going to talk about the forces that twist what we hear about science generally, and then I'll come back to some of the forces in the context of health. Well, I do think this is an area where we do a lot of research. I've had the opportunity to research this topic for many, many years. I find it fascinating. But there really are a lot of forces at play, from the researchers who are just excited about their work, to research institutions, to the media, and even us, how we perceive things. These cognitive biases have a play. And I think it's this, I call it a hype pipeline, that impacts how we perceive things. Now, I am a science geek. I believe that science eventually prevails, like through replication of studies, through good research. I think that we nudge ourselves closer to the truth. Science eventually prevails. But the things I'm going to talk about today, at a minimum, make the scientific process, much more inefficient. Now, this is a study that a paper that I published with Celeste Condit from the University of Georgia in 2012. And what we did is we tried to map all of the forces that twist and have an impact on what researchers, and we were looking at university researchers, how their work is portrayed. And we called it a hype pipeline. And there really are many, many, many forces. And fear not, I'm not going to go through all of them, but career pressure, publication pressure. I know there's academics in the room here. Institutional pressure, funding pressure, commercialization pressure, there's vested interests. All of these things work to twist what we hear about science, and the public gets what's at the end of the pipeline, right? So let's just go through a couple of examples here so I can move forward quickly. Let's look at the research setting. Studies have shown again and again that medical research is often what's found and published in not only in peer-reviewed journals but in the media is often exaggerated. One of my favorite researchers, John Ioannidis from Stanford, has done great work on this. Here's one of his well-known studies that found that research results that have a large effect size in the context of biomedical research, so there's a large effect size, are almost always wrong. He comes to that grand of a conclusion. In fact, he comes to the conclusion that big effect size in the context of biomedical research are phenomenally rare, ones that will hold up after replication. Replication studies always narrow the effect size, right? This last study, the one that says U.S. studies may overestimate the effect size, is also a great example of how the environment can have an impact on how science is represented. It's a very clever study that John did here. He looked at the impact of different environments, again, on the effect size. And what he found was in countries where there's more research competition, where the competition as an academic is more intense, such as in the United States, the effect size is bigger, which is scientifically impossible. You follow that, right? The effect size should be the same everywhere. He speculates, and John is always very, very careful about how he represents his work, but he speculates that it's just systemic pressure on researchers to make their work look more exciting so they can get more profile in a more competitive environment. Really good example of how the subtle forces have an impact on how science is represented. So you have that kind of hyped work happening already at the level of the researcher. Then it goes to the research institution, and people are into the press, and people write abstracts. I'm sure, how many people here have written an abstract for a paper? Almost everyone, probably. The researchers write these. Studies have shown that 40 to 50% of all abstracts have some hype in them, or some spin, or some exaggeration in them. Those are the abstracts. And then, of course, it goes to the press release, right? And the university press release puts a little bit more spin in it, of course. And it's those press releases that have an impact on how the media portrays it. Now, unfortunately, what happens is that those first exciting stories about some big effect size or some exciting new diet, those are the ones that get the headlines. And studies have shown, this, again, interesting study, that the subsequent research does not get as much attention. So as a result, the myth, the belief in the big effect size in popular culture lives on. Now, let's move to the media a little bit. One of the great problems in the context of health, the area where I do most of my research, is that the studies, the actual methodologies that are used are often, I won't call them problematic, but they're challenging. They're often association studies. They're often big cohort studies. There may be people in the room here that do this kind of work. That research is valuable and useful. But when you're studying diet, when you're studying the impact of physical activity, it's very, very difficult to do it in a way where you get actual causation. What you get is an association, right? You study 200,000 people, and those who eat broccoli have lower chance of colorectal cancer. Therefore, there's an association between broccoli and cancer rates, right? But it's just an association. And so much of the work in this area is like that. But association studies are inherently limited. This is one of my favorite studies. Now, if Canada wants to get more Nobel Prizes, I just came from Switzerland, so I have firsthand qualitative data on this. If we want to get more Nobel Prizes, Canada should, all of us should eat more chocolate. Because there is a very strong correlation between the amount of chocolate a country eats and the number of Nobel Prizes that they have, right? In fact, these researchers went even further. They did some qualitative work. They interviewed this Nobel laureate who won the Nobel Prize in Physics in 2001, and he says he attributes all of his success to the very large amount of chocolate that he consumes. And he goes even further, and he says that you got to eat that dark chocolate because milk chocolate is not as powerful. He later regrets his statements, and he says, I'm sorry that I insulted milk chocolate because it's good too. So you get where I'm going here. There are these association studies, and so much in health is based on these kind of association studies. Let me give you a couple other good examples of correlation problems. The divorce rate in Maine is very closely tied to the amount of margarine that the state eats. People who die in their bed sheets, I didn't even know this happened, people die, get entangled in their bed sheets, is very closely tied to the revenue from skiing facilities. And we can even point to Nicolas Cage as a real problem. The number of people who drown in swimming pools is tightly correlated. And look how tightly correlated that is to the number of films Nicolas Cage appears in. And he does a lot of movies, so there's a lot of data there. And this last one is very depressing to me because I love ice cream. Ice cream consumption leads to murder. So this is funny stuff, but it's a very important cautionary tale, right? So much of this data, particularly diet data, is correlation data, and so should give us pause. Here's another good example of how the media can have difficulty with methodologies. Again, we're going back to red wine. We all love wine. Do you guys see this headline? See this story? Red wine can help you lose weight, so you can drink as much as you want. They say that about chocolate, too, allegedly. You can eat as much chocolate as you want. So who did they do this research on? Everyone says French women, but it wasn't French women. They did the research on bees. So it wasn't even rats. It wasn't even chimpanzees. It was bees. I picture a bee with a little Chardonnay, you know. And they didn't even give the bees all the wine. They just gave them a component of the wine. Now, this is a really important message because it goes to the danger of looking at animal studies. it is very rarely, and again, I know people in this room probably know this, but it's worth repeating, it's very rare when an animal study actually translates into something that is clinically useful. It's extremely rare. In fact, less than 9 in 10 animal studies even make it to clinical trial, right? And those are the high quality ones. So we have that problem. We have to be very, very cautious about that. Now, the other twisting force, and this is one that we have done a lot of research, and I think it's becoming, I'm very passionate about this problem, and it's becoming a bigger issue, is commercialization pressure. All the researchers in this room now will have sensed this pressure. There's increasing pressure on the research community in Canada and really around the world to only do research that is of commercial value, or to link with industry, or to do research that can be translated rapidly. My favorite example of this pressure is from Barack Obama's 2011 State of the Union address, where he said that this is our country's Sputnik moment. He called it the Sputnik moment. He was evoking that time in the United States where the scientific community rallied to put a man on the moon, right? But he wasn't talking about going to the moon. He wasn't talking about curiosity-driven research. He was talking about using research as a way to stimulate the economy. So he was saying to the United States research community, this is your Sputnik moment, and use your research in order to stimulate the economy. He went so far to say that we will invest in biomedical research in order to create countless new jobs for our people. Now that is really significant translation pressure. And I believe it's that kind of translation pressure that leads to the hyped language around a lot of science. The genetic revolution, the stem cell revolution, the nanotechnology revolution. We have to frame it in these big terms because that's the way it has to be framed in order to get not only the attention of politicians, but of funders, etc. Now, we just finished a study that will be coming out in the near future on the Canadian research environment. And what we did is we looked at virtually every funding agency in Canada, whether at the federal, provincial, or institutional level. And we found, don't worry, you don't have to read this stuff, that no matter where you look, whether it's in these from these funding agencies to funding entities such as the CIHR, to universities, this commercialization ethos exists. In fact, we conclude there's no place in the Canadian research funding environment that is not touched by this commercialization and rapid translation ethos. And more importantly, we think that the costs and the downside of that, such as twisting the message, are not mentioned anywhere. So we have this commercialization pressure. So let me go through a couple other twisting forces, what I call some of the underplayed ones that have an impact on what the public hears about health and biomedical science. The first one, have you guys heard this one? It's called the white hat bias. And this is a force that causes, and this was done in the context of obesity research, that is associated with a phenomenon where if the research is associated with a noble cause, right, fighting obesity, it's more likely to get published and the effect size is more likely to be big. Right? So it's a righteous cause, a noble cause, and therefore the research is more likely to get published and the effect size is likely to be bigger. Another one, and this is an area that we're doing more and more research, is social media. Studies are showing again and again that social media, how you work social media, will have an impact on whether a study is referenced, is cited, and the impact that study might have. Here's a really great example of that. Do people know who Craig Venter is? Craig Venter is a very, very famous geneticist. He's like a rock star geneticist. When he shows up in conferences, he has his own bus. He has his own entourage. His bus has got a big double helix painted down the side of it. And he does great work. But he tweets before a study is coming out to sort of heighten excitement about his study. And sure enough, it has an impact. It worked for me. I followed him. It has an impact on whether you read the study and whether the study will be subsequently cited. And we've just published this study, and was presented just a couple days ago by my colleague, Kalina Kamenova, on how stem cell clinics and and the industry side of science also uses Twitter, right, and uses social media to get their message across. Studies have shown, recent studies have shown that these kinds of social media work can have an impact in a really significant way. I won't go into great detail here, but this study found that all forms of social media are significantly associated with increased citations and impact factor. Now, people may say, well, that's great. What's wrong with that? And I am of two minds here, because I think it's fantastic that social media allows more people to have rapid access to scientific information. I use Twitter a lot. You might have seen I have my Twitter name up there on the first slide. So I do think it can be very, very useful. But it can also allow bad scientific information to get a foothold. And this is, it can allow what's been called the availability cascade. Cass Sunstein has talked about this, to take hold. Once the bad information's out there, it just keeps flowing and flowing, and it becomes very, very difficult to bring it back in. So social media may accelerate the availability cascade, allowing bad science to get a foothold. Okay, so the next influence, and I think this is the last influence I'm going to talk about, is celebrities, our celebrities. Now, again, it may seem like a frivolous topic, but I think this is an incredibly important topic and one that is becoming more important. Now, as people in this room probably know, this is Jenny McCarthy. She is a former Playboy bunny. She's a former talk show host. And she is probably the world's greatest advocate for the anti-vaccination, the autism myth. And she has had a tangible impact. In fact, I think she's had an impact on my own province and the number of people that are getting vaccinated. This woman has had a real impact, spreading unscientific statements about vaccination. And we have seen the decrease in vaccination rates occurring around the world. And then we have this individual. Does everyone in the room know this person, Dr. Oz? The man drives me nuts. He absolutely drives me nuts. I don't know how he sleeps at night. Probably on a bed of money, right? He spreads unscientific truths. Now, he's an interesting phenomenon because he's a real professor, a real doctor at Columbia University, and the things that he says are incredible. And he have a real impact. He talks about homeopathy. He talks about, again, these energy fields being cured by relieving through back manipulation. He talks about magic weight loss, and he loves detoxes. Detoxes, by the way, there's absolutely no evidence whatsoever to support the idea of a detox, by the way. And he is incredibly influential. And here's my friend Gwyneth Paltrow again, talking about using her organic foods, but also smoking, which I cannot believe. And again, pushing her detox. Now, by the way, for my latest book, I went on Gwyneth's detox. I went on her cleanse. I went to Hollywood and met with her doctor, and I had her doctor prescribe her routine for me, which I followed religiously for the amount of time I was supposed to follow it. It was hell. And I'll be happy to tell you more about that in the question period if we have time. Of course, not a stitch of evidence to support that. And here we have Katy Perry. Does everyone know Katy Perry? Probably the most, I think you could argue, one of the most famous female singers alive today. And she is all about taking vitamins and supplements. And here's a picture of her holding up all the vitamins that she takes in the day. She's really proud of her vitamin life. Now, people may say, so what? Why would people care what Katy Perry says about vitamins? How many Twitter followers does Katy Perry have? 54 million. So there's interesting research that shows that people develop this parasocial relationship with people like Katy Perry, and they believe that they're having an interaction with her when they're having an interaction on Twitter with her, and that heightens her influence that she may have. Justin Bieber, by the way, only has 50 million followers. Just thought you might want to. So we have this kind of influence that Twitter has. Now, again, people in this room, you're a very sophisticated audience. You may be saying, I know celebrities say stupid things. I don't believe them. I don't follow them. Well, there's some interesting emerging research, and one of them actually done by one of the Trudeau scholars, Stephen Hoffman, suggests that we are unconsciously influenced by celebrities. And other researchers suggest that we're evolutionarily predisposed to follow celebrities. We can't help ourselves. So they have a real impact. And there are a lot of other studies that show the impact they have. They can impact organ donation rates, We've already talked about vaccinations. They influence suicide rates, etc. And of course, there's the story of Angela Jolie. We actually did a study on how the Angela Jolie study was portrayed. And it was not portrayed as well as some people think. In fact, we found that most of the elite media did not mention how rare her condition was, giving sort of the assumption that everyone should get genetic testing and that prophylactic mastectomy was maybe more useful to people than the science would suggest. And there's been subsequent work that has shown that to be the case. So celebrities can have a real, tangible impact in this domain. So there is what I call a cycle of hype. And what makes this whole phenomenon that I've talked about today more problematic is all of these forces are complicit collaborators. They all work together in a chain, right? There are very few sources or forces on the other side. In the short term, everyone benefits from the hype, from the twisted messages, from the confusion. The market wins, the celebrities wins, everyone wins, of course, except for the general public and our health. So I think that we need science-informed, independent, accessible sources of information. And we can relax and we can ignore almost everything that we hear, especially the stuff that Gwyneth says. So moving forward, what can we do? I think as a community, we need to think about changing our incentives, how we incentivize scientific research. Researchers need to get involved in popular culture. Now, I know this may sound counterintuitive, but social media is not going away. Celebrities aren't going away. Popular culture is not going away. I think the research community needs to get engaged and become part of the discussion so good scientific information is out there. I do think we need more well-financed, independent sources of public health information, things like the Cochrane collaboration, which I'm a big believer in. I think it needs, the public needs to have information that they can access and feel confident accessing. So do healthcare providers. I think we probably need more media training. I think we need to nurture skepticism in our schools. I started with my own skeptical belief that nothing works. I don't know if we need to go that far, but I do think we need to nurture skepticism and an understanding of the scientific method. And I also think, finally, that we need to face the impact of aggressive commercialization and translation pressure. I do believe that working with industry is valuable, but I think that it also has a downside. So my concluding comment would be that producing and protecting good science has emerged as one of the most important functions that a government and a liberal democracy can do. I truly believe that, and I think that entities like the Trudeau Foundation go a long way to making this happen. So I'm going to end there and say thank you very, very much for your time, and I hope you have some questions. And I look forward to the panel. Again, thank you very much for this opportunity. A true honor to be here.
We eat.
Alors, une question, I'll go in English for you. What could university principals and deans do to try to limit the effects of such a translation process and the commercialization of research results?
I think that it's a great question. I think that researchers and the media offices of universities should work increasingly close together. I think that's starting to happen, and I know we have people from media in the room, where the press releases are checked and they are deemed to be accurate. Now, I do a lot of media, and what I try to do is come up with a statement that is media-friendly, that I feel is very, very, I'm comfortable with. And that can be a real challenge, right? Taking a complicated topic and making it into a sentence or even shorter that is available. But I think that is a really good first step. In addition to that, I think that deans and presidents of universities should encourage the faculty
to get involved in popular culture and to get involved with the media. I think there is a great hesitancy in academia to stay away from that. You know, I have many colleagues that don't like dealing with the media, or they almost look down on the idea of doing things for popular culture. I understand that, and I sympathize with that, but we can't ignore the power and the importance of popular culture in this domain, whether it's health or some other area, climate change, you name it, right? So I think that those are just two very practical things that can happen. And perhaps even in their evaluation of, every year we get evaluated as academics, perhaps that could even be part of the evaluation. You know, what have you done? Where relevant, where relevant.
Est-ce qu'il y a des fabricants de médicaments ou d'autres substances pour la santé paient des chercheurs pour avoir les résultats qu'ils veulent? Est-ce qu'il pourrait y avoir une investigation là-dessus? Est-ce que vous comprenez ma question?
Please.
So, are there researchers who are doing research paid by commercial interests?
Oh, yes. It's a great question. Now, we've actually studied this. Again, I'm not putting down the idea of getting paid by industry. In order to translate, we live in a market economy. And in order to get health products and even health services to the clinic, often you're required to partner with industry. And those can be very productive and fruitful partnerships. But it does have an impact on the nature of the research and how the research is represented. And there's been studies again and again and again that have demonstrated that's the case. The other thing that we have found in our research is that the trust that the public puts in a researcher decreases substantially when the researcher is involved in industry. So we asked Albertans, over 1,000 Albertans, who they trusted in the context of research, and in the context of it was in health in general. But almost number one was university researchers. But that trust deteriorates rapidly when that university researcher receives funds from industry, just to show how sensitized the public is to these issues. So it's a great question. Increasingly, it's becoming rare for biomedical researchers not to have some kind of interaction with industry. So I think we need to get clever about how to foster those very productive relationships while still maintaining the integrity of the research and the trust of the public.
Hi, thank you. First of all, I want to thank you because we are a large number of people here from the communicational area, so it's very interesting because your problem is a communicational problem first, so thank you. And my question is, we are in a society of fast information and social media. Is that aspect helping for the healthcare system, or is it adding to the problem?
Again, a great question, and you probably know the answer better than I do, but and your colleagues also. I think it's a double-edged sword, right? I think that on the one hand, there is more access to this information. There's more access to even real, people like never before can access the actual studies, right? They can access, or at least the abstract. So I think that is wonderful. And also there's this idea of empowering individuals to take more action. However, I think that because of all the reasons I've said, there's so much bad information out there. Again, you know this. And then you layer on top of that the problem of the cognitive biases such as confirmation bias, right? People go when they find information that accords to what they already believe. I think it makes it incredibly problematic. And also, again, as I said earlier, there's no really solid data that suggests that just giving people this information necessarily will lead to healthier or better decisions. So unfortunately, it's a real mixed bag. But I'm a pragmatist, and I'm sure, again, you know this as well as I do. It's not going anywhere, right? Social media is here. And so we have to figure out how to work with social media and how to get the best out of it while trying to somehow moderate the problems.
What would be your personal intuitions about how to put the social media to use in order to improve, health awareness in general?
Oh, that's a tough.
Do you have any? Do you have any?
So I do have thoughts. It sort of builds on what I was saying before. I think that that people need to get on. They really need to get involved in social media. Researchers, they need to tweet their work in a way that is understandable to create access to this information. But in addition to that, I think that we need to have access to the actual data, and that. So there's I wrote a piece, or was involved in a piece that was in a document called Healthy Debate, where we were profiling the Norwegian model. And in Norway, they tried to make all health research accessible to everybody. So there's no paywalls. Everyone has access, whether you're a citizen, a family doctor, a physiotherapist, everyone can access the same information. So I think we need that, maybe not to that degree, but down in that direction. And then in addition to that, the next layer is we need trustworthy summaries of that information. That's why I love the Cochrane collaboration, but perhaps they could get better at making it the summaries of what the data actually says more accessible for the general public, more relevant to the general public. And then the next layer is to use social media, whether it's Twitter, Facebook, etc., to translate that to the public and get it into the social media universe so it's out there, so good information at least has a fighting chance. Thank you. Well, thank you very, very much, you guys. I look forward to interacting with you later. Thank you.
Thank you.